Our top story this hour is coming from Pune, where a 19-year-old was molested by a food delivery man on Saturday. Now, according to the FIR that has been registered, the man carrying the food first inquired about her personal details. He then reportedly held her hand and pulled her close in an alleged attempt to kiss her. Now, food delivery aggregator Zomato, through which the food had been booked, has released a statement saying the accused is not a Zomato delivery partner. They also said that Zomato will cooperate with authorities in the investigation that is ongoing. Now, the food delivery man has been booked for intent to sexually assault and has been arrested. He's now out on bail. But question is, can Zomato shrug off responsibility so easily?
कोंडवा पुलिस स्टेशन अपराध क्रमांक 941 अन्वय मामला दर्ज है। उस मामले में मोलेस्टेशन किया गया है एक लड़की का, और वो अपराध में जो अपराधी है उसको अरेस्ट किया गया है। अपराध का अन्वेषण चालू है।
Let me go straight across to our guests who are joining us this evening on this absolutely shocking story that played out in Pune on Saturday. Mr. P.K. Jain is a former additional DGP of Maharashtra. Talish Ray is an activist and an advocate. And Virag Gupta is a Supreme Court advocate. He's also a cybersecurity expert. Talish Ray, I'm starting with you first. You've seen the sequence of events. You've seen the charges that have been slapped against the delivery boy. I want to ask you if Zomato can shrug off its responsibility so easily. What are they saying here? They are saying, look, the food may have been booked via our app, but he was not our guy. The person who delivered the food was not one of our executives.
Yeah, so it's actually pretty shocking, because if the food was booked by them, just because the delivery partner was not there, when people order from a particular app, it is because there is an assurance that there is going to be a certain quality standards, including that of delivery. Now, this sort of shrugging of liability is not the first time that we've seen aggregators come up and say, oh, this person was not our partner. Let's go back, way back in 2014, when the Uber rape case happened. That's exactly the kind of arguments that were forwarded. So, at some sense, just to get a gist without getting into the legalese, is Zomato liable? Of course it is liable. If I'm using the app, if you're using the app, whoever uses the app is actually liable beyond a point in time, because there is an additional delivery charge that they take for this. So they have to accept liability for safety, which is a guarantee. Otherwise, why not order from a local restaurant and ask them to send their own person over? That's why we go in for these aggregators, because there's a trust factor beyond the point in time.
There is a trust factor beyond a point of time. You're absolutely right, because when you are ordering from these aggregators, whether it be Zomato, whether it be Swiggy, or whether it be anyone, Amazon delivers, for example, Flipkart delivers, for example, all e-commerce people, they come to our houses, they come to our homes. And, there is someone who's calling you from your gate and asking you, can I send this person in? So there is a bond of trust that you're supposed to have with these people. Mr. P.K. Jain, what do you make of the incident that has played out in Pune? Are you seeing this as something that's an exception that should not have happened but has happened? Because, I mean, largely speaking, while people have not had, not all people have had pleasant experiences with, say, a Zomato or a Swiggy in terms of food not being delivered on time, etc. But there's never anything been, something as adverse as this, something that clearly, is a violation of law.
Ji, namaskar. Thank you so much for inviting me to the show. See, this kind of a thing can always happen, though such cases are by far few and in between. But Zomato has to own the responsibility, as my co-panelists have clearly and categorically certified, that if a person is delivering on behalf of Zomato, the person has to be certified, verified. Now, what Zomato does is that they subcontract this activity to another agency. And that agency, whether they are open or not, I don't think Zomato would look into it. There is a complaint. Now, if there is a complaint, in any case, the police has taken action. But I think the Zomato should also certify their suppliers, and the people who deliver the stuff on their behalf have to be certified. Like in the case of Uber, etc. Now, there's a little bit of maturity, and they state that this person has been verified. He's isolated person and all.
Mr. Jain, I'm afraid your line is not very clear. We'll try and fix it. I'm going to get Virag Gupta into this conversation as well. Any liability on Zomato in this case? Because they can easily say, look, yes, we are the aggregators. You placed an order with us. We sent that order to the restaurant, and the restaurant sent their own people to deliver the food. So why are you holding us liable? Virag Gupta, in this case, what will the law tell us?
It seems you've got the wrong name. My name is Lloyd Matthias.
I'm so sorry. I do apologize for this. There seems to have been a mix-up.
No worries. I'll take that. I think it's a great subject that you've tabled this debate on, and I'd certainly go with the lady panelist. I think the first point is clearly we are really in the age of the gig economy. There are lots of apps today, the Uber, the Olas, the Swiggies, the Zomatos, the Amazons, the Flipkarts, who depend on third-party delivery agents. Having said which, since as customers, we place our primary trust on the app when you order food to a Swiggy and Zomato, I think it's their responsibility to ensure end-to-end service. So they not only guarantee a price, they also guarantee that you pay. I think they also guarantee a certain degree of safety. So I think if these apps are not able to actually verify the antecedents of the delivery people that they appoint, I think the responsibility rests squarely on them, right? So I don't think they can distance themselves saying this is a third party, because invariably, and if you look at companies across the country, a lot of them have a bulk of their employees who are off-roads, work through contractors, who work through intermediaries, right? But I think a company owns the entire transaction end-to-end, from the time you place an order, so the ease of using the app, to the time you make the payment, to the time you actually get delivery for your goods and services in the right order. So I think clearly the blame or the responsibility is of the app, and they cannot walk away from the responsibility at all in this instance.
But would you say, Lloyd, and apologies for for getting your name wrong earlier on, but are these the perils of the gig economy? That these are things that we probably need to not make peace with, but at least expect.
I think in a sense that is real. The gig economy is a recent phenomenon, you can say, in the last 5-6 years, and particularly over the pandemic, it has accelerated dramatically. The extent of online transactions have gone up, have increased tremendously. But having said which, I still think that it's the responsibility of the app owner who's actually owning the end-to-end transaction to actually ascertain the safety standards, right? And Uber can't walk away from the fact that a driver misbehaves with a passenger. So in that sense, they have to have their safety checks in place to ensure that customers don't feel unsafe, because the whole idea of the gig economy is that it's a kind of impersonal transaction. You're paying the app is paying the driver. So if the app is paying the driver, they already have a relationship, right? They register him on the platform. They know the vehicle he drives. He gets ratings by crowdsourced ratings. So I think they have to take the responsibility of verifying to a large extent. There may be exceptions, but they have to verify everyone. Now and then, of course, people can still turn rogue, and that's the reality. But I think there's a lot more responsibility that has to remain with the owner of the app. And I think that is very critical as the gig economy further develops.
Talish Ray, feedback is critical to this gig economy, whether it is for Uber, whether it is for Ola, whether it's for Zomato, whether it is for Swiggy. Every time, a delivery boy comes to our place, or we book an Uber or an Ola, after the experience, we are asked to rate that experience, rate the person behind that experience. It's not like, say, a Zomato or an Uber and Ola don't have systems in place. They do have systems in place, but there are weaknesses then.
Yeah, so Shreya, actually, it's interesting that you talk about the weaknesses, because I think number one weakness is the fact that there aren't enough laws that are in place in order to be able to regulate the gig economy. Gig economy as a phenomena is also, if one doesn't use the latest term, which is gig economy, there is a certain amount of what we recognize in law as intermediary liability. So that intermediary liability is pretty much applicable. A lot of the times what happens with the aggregators in the market is that they find the easy way out by saying, oh, we are not responsible because you see, we only take our responsibility to that an extent. So there's a limitation of liability that they're trying to draw there, which itself is something something where we need very strong case law precedents, laws in order to put that to an end, because repeatedly now gig economy is the way for the future, because we have seen that in the past we are seeing people moving towards the more informal sector. So if you look at how all of these aggregators deal with, and one looks at the other side of those that are employed by these aggregators as their so-called business partners, we are seeing that weakness that is coming in, and this is a weakness of the model itself, and that weakness of the model at some point in time or the other needs to be taken up by lawmakers, because your current law does not have enough to be able to establish that there is a clear liability. Therefore, we have statements that come in saying, oh, we are not responsible, but we will cooperate. Well, what does that even mean? Of course, you have to cooperate. I mean, there is a girl who ordered on an app. She ordered on the trust basis of the app. She paid for it. So there is a contractual liability that has been built. Now, the question remains as to how deep is the criminal liability that is looked into, which is something that the courts will have to look into. So there's a fair bit of work that is needed in terms of being able to adapt to these systems. But overall, like I said, I think the precedent itself was set by the Uber rape case when it came about. And I think somewhere also for these companies to realize, just like Uber did, and work very hard to be able to upgrade their system. For example, prior to 2014, you did not have an SOS button. Today, if you're getting on a cab app, there is an SOS button where you can inform, give out your location, you can call up their apps. So similarly, all of these people will also have to do, because there is the unfortunate part, which is that crime against women is rising. So you look at the National Crime Records Bureau, which says that from 2020 to on to 2021, there's been a rise of 15.3%. Now, this might look like numbers, but we're talking about from something in the 50s range to moving in the 60s range per lakh. And we know how few such crimes do not really get reported. So it's rare for a crime like this to even come out forward in the public domain, because very often there's so much of victim shaming that internalized, it's unlikely, Shreya, that a woman is actually going to go up and say, because you already would have those questions. Why was the girl offering water? Why did she not let go of, why did she not have somebody in the house? What was she doing alone? All of those questions come up as a part of societal patriarchal victim shaming. So currently we have a huge lacuna where gig economy is concerned, and I'm talking both sides. I'm talking from the consumer side in terms of what are their rights, what is the safety they can expect. I'm talking from those that are employed as gig workers or are so-called merchant partners, which also becomes a very false term, so to speak. So, because these are not really partners, they're basically suppliers in that sense. So at that point, we're staring at a huge gap, and if the gap is not covered, it is likely to day on day that these incidents are going to escalate.
Lloyd, but say someone like a Zomato can easily turn back and say, look, the people we send, our partners, delivery partners who are verified by us, they wear uniforms, we are giving you guarantee for them. What happens to the others? If there's someone coming from the restaurant, how can we possibly give a guarantee for that guy? They seem to have a point as well. How can you verify 100% of the people who work for you? That is a big ask as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that is true. But I think I'd agree with Ms. Rai. And I think when I say two things, I think one is, if you look at, let's say, the traditional economy, a lot of companies have people working on contracts. Now, the law is very clear that when you're on contract, you're still an employee, or you get covered under the work practice of the company, of the principal company, right? So you may be on a team lease or a Quest Corporation or various third-party hires, but the parent company, the principal hire, the work practices still remain. And this is specific to dropping women home after 7 o'clock. A lot of companies have it.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of those companies use third-party premises like a WeWork, in which case the responsibility still remains with the primary employer, who in turn will get a counter guarantee with the last mile. In this case, WeWork, who might do the final dropping. Specific in the instance of Swiggy, Zomato, and these gig workers, I think as owners of the app, as someone who own the entire transaction and make money from the transaction, I think they have to invest in whatever it takes, screening processes, or really processes whereby they can ensure a certain degree of sanity in that transaction. They can't leave it to as a consumer, you don't have the option. And as the previous panelist said, if I were to order directly from a restaurant, then it's my responsibility. Then it's between the restaurant and me. But since I'm using an intermediary, and the intermediary makes money from that transaction, I think they are duty bound to ensure that the transaction is safe for the consumer. And I'm totally, again, in agreement with what the previous panelist said. At the same time, also the rights of the gig worker are equally important. And I think there is a lot of progress to be made. Right now, a lot of things are completely open on these fronts.
Right now, Zomato cannot just shrug off its responsibility and say, hey, the guy wasn't us. I think that's very clear. That's what everyone is saying. They've issued a statement saying as much, but that should not be acceptable under any circumstances. Mr. P.K. Jain, you're back on the line with us. Before I end this chat, from the citizen's point of view, I never thought this is a question that we'd be debating on national television, but since the case has happened, yes, the Uber rape case did take place, but these are food delivery boys. Every second day, they are coming to our homes. Most of us have had a good experience with them. They are working hard, they're feeding their families, etc., etc. So I never thought that this is a question that I'd probably need to ask. But what does Pune teach us? What has happened in Pune? What does that teach us? Do we now need to take precautions to keep ourselves safe from this stranger who we thought is verified but not verified, who's coming to our doorstep?
I agree with you, Shreya. There are 2-3 lessons to be learned. Even in a normal circumstance, I think individuals have to be very, very careful while opening their doors to individuals and while letting them in. In fact, in this case also, though Ms. Roy has very clearly stated that eventually questions will be asked from that girl also. She had to get water for this gentleman. She should have closed the door and gone inside rather than keeping the door open. In our decency, we keep the doors open, but we must shut our door on unknown persons in our house, whether it's a delivery boy, and these are all unseen people. We trust them because they're coming from a particular delivery agency or from a particular app agency. So my suggestion is that there's no criminality that can be attached to Zomato in this case, because there has to be common intention for a co-accused to be that individual who has to face this particular music.
Okay. We leave it there for
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And I think you've made the point that I know in our decency, many times we offer people a glass of water. These are strangers who come to our house. And it needs to be done if it's a hot day, etc. But even if you need to do that, just keep the door shut. Don't open the door. At least don't leave the door open, as Mr. P.K. Jain is saying to strangers. We leave it there for the moment. I'm going to thank our panelists very much for joining us this evening. Mr. P.K. Jain, Talish Ray and Lloyd Matthias, thank you very much. We are shifting our focus from Pune now to